10 ways to become the woman who stays in a narcissist's mind forever. The narcissist's ultimate agenda with you was never rooted in love, at least not the kind that nourishes, protects, or elevates. What they sought was your quiet dismantling, a subtle, calculated unraveling of your essence until the brilliance of who you were dimmed into something unremarkable, something they could overlook without consequence. And wise, convince you to forget yourself. 2. Their mission was to blend you into the background of your own life, to recast you as just another shadow in the crowd, a placeholder in their rotating theater of control, forgettable, interchangeable, stripped of spark and wonder. They never loved you to witness your soul expand. They loved you in the way a hunter observes its prey, carefully, with deliberate curiosity, not to admire, but to study and disassemble. Each sweet word, each affectionate gesture, each promise that once felt like safety was never offered freely. It was all part of a script, written not in devotion, but in anticipation of its eventual weaponization. The embrace was not comfort, it was choreography. The praise was not celebration, it was reconnaissance. Because in the end, they didn't want a partner, they wanted a project to deconstruct, a mirror to distort, a spirit to extinguish and claim as conquered. To them, your identity was clay they could reshape with their bare hands. Your passion, a wildfire they longed to snuff out. Your story, a footnote to their grand illusion of power. And while they walked away thinking they had rewritten your worth, thinking they had reduced you to ash, what they didn't realize, what they never see coming, is the version of you that rises in the aftermath. The woman who reclaims herself piece by sacred piece. The woman they tried to erase but who refused to stay gone. Because here's the truth, narcissists aren't terrified of being forgotten. No, what unsettles them to their core is the possibility that you will remember who you truly are, beyond their manipulation, beyond their lies. That you'll look in the mirror and see not the damaged version they tried to convince you was real, but the woman who survived them, the woman who began again. You were never ordinary. You were never dull. You were never theirs to label, reduce, or destroy. What you were, and still are, is a disruption, a divine interference to their delusion. A light too wild to cage, too sacred to counterfeit. And the more you rise, the more their false narrative crumbles. With every boundary you draw, with every truth you reclaim, with every inch of peace you cultivate, they lose. Not because you're playing their game, but because you chose to leave the battlefield entirely, crown unshaken, spirit intact. And so today, I want to walk with you through the sacred art of becoming unforgettable, not for revenge, not for validation, but as a quiet act of rebellion. A declaration that you chose healing over hostility, clarity over chaos, self over survival mode. You will not be remembered as the one who shattered. You will be remembered as the one who rose, elegant, unbothered, unbreakable. Because despite every attempt to bury you in silence, shame, and self-doubt, you chose to bloom anyway. And that, my love, is the one thing they were never prepared for. Now let's talk about how to walk away, not as a casualty of their story, but as the author of your own. The woman they couldn't erase, the woman they never deserved, the woman who remembered who she was, just in time. Number 1. Become the woman who sees the truth in the repetition, not the illusion in their potential. Narcissists are master illusionists, but the trick only works when you buy into the fantasy they are selling. They don't want you to see who they really are. They want you to cling to who they might become, to the version of themselves they showed you for 5 seconds and then withheld for 5 months. They thrive on your hope, your imagination, your belief that love can fix what someone refuses to even acknowledge. But there comes a moment, a sacred, unshakable moment, when you stop staring at the dream and start studying the data. You begin noticing the emotional patterns they thought you'd never catch. The cycle, the charm, the chaos, the crash. You stop rationalizing. You stop explaining away their harm with what could be. And when you make that shift, when you finally say, no more of who you promised to become, I'm walking away because of who you keep choosing to be, something inside of them collapses. Because the greatest threat to a narcissist isn't exposure. It's being seen, truly seen, and not needing to be destroyed in order to walk away. That is a power they will never forget. Number 2, be the woman who breaks the script and throws the performance into chaos. Narcissists don't just want control. They rehearse it. They condition you, slowly and silently, like a puppeteer teaching you which strings to move, when to speak, when to shrink, when to cry, when to apologize for bleeding after they've cut you. They sculpt your reactions like clay until you forget what your own voice even sounded like before they mold it into fear. But the day you stop playing along is the day their entire act unravels. When you no longer flinch at their silence. When you don't chase after their withdrawal. When their stonewalling, blame-shifting, gaslighting, or dramatics only meet your calm, unwavering stillness. That's when you reclaim your rhythm. That's when the script falls apart. And it stuns them. Not because you yelled, not because you fought back, but because you didn't. That quiet rebellion, the refusal to dance to their chaos, is more haunting than any argument could ever be. And deep in their mind, a thought begins to echo. She's not afraid of me anymore. And that thought will stay, long after you've gone. Because in their world, where control is God, your indifference is blasphemy. And your peace, it's the one thing they'll never know how to possess. Number 3, be the kind of woman who walks away without leaving a trail, without seeking closure, without giving them a final scene to feed on. Narcissists expect you to crumble at the end. They anticipate the tears, the late-night messages, the desperate calls, or the emotional monologue across the table where you beg them to explain why they shattered something that once felt sacred. That's their fantasy, to watch you unravel while they sit back and sip power from your pain. But when you vanish without explanation, when you remove your presence, your words, your energy, when you simply go silent, they are left with nothing to manipulate, nothing to twist, nothing to feed on. And for someone who needs to control every narrative, your silence becomes a punishment far more piercing than any scream. Because in that silence, you've taken back your power. You didn't give them the ending they rehearsed. And for a narcissist, that absence is unbearable. Number 4, become the woman who doesn't just survive after them, but thrives in ways they never imagined. The greatest revenge against someone who tried to erase you is to become more alive, more radiant, and more unapologetically whole than ever before. When your light returns, when your laughter fills the room again, your health improves, your creativity flows, and your energy expands. They are forced to witness what they failed to destroy. Narcissists often believe they are the source of your joy, your confidence, your identity. They want to believe they shaped you, owned a part of your spirit. But when you come back stronger, without them, it breaks that illusion entirely. Every step you take in your healing, every success, every smile, every moment of peace you claim without them becomes undeniable proof that they were never your foundation to begin with. And that truth, that they weren't essential, that you're flourishing in their absence, that's the truth they cannot unsee. Number 5, evolve into the woman whose boundaries are immovable, not because she is hard, but because she is healed. To a narcissist, boundaries feel like rejection. They interpret your no as a personal insult, a challenge to their control, an attack on the very illusion they've built around being irreplaceable. But the day you stop folding yourself into the shapes they prefer, the day you stop tiptoeing to keep the peace, is the day you become someone they cannot manipulate. When you begin honoring your truth over their approval, when their silence no longer intimidates you, when their guilt trips and performative apologies no longer influence your decisions, you step into a power that doesn't require explanation. Your boundaries stop being a defense and start becoming a mirror, one that forces them to see the reality of who they are when control no longer works. And that reflection, that glimpse of powerlessness, it lingers in their psyche far longer than they will ever admit. Number 6, be the kind of woman who no longer auditions for love she already deserves. A narcissist thrives on your performance, on watching you twist yourself into shapes for their approval, explain your heart like it's on trial, prove your love over and over just to be met with indifference, confusion, or worse. punishment. They don't misunderstand you. They choose not to understand. Why? Because if they acknowledged your worth, the game would be over. Their control would vanish. But something extraordinary happens when you stop explaining, when you stop pleading to be seen, when you simply decide that you are enough without their applause or acceptance. That moment, the one where you no longer need their validation, is the moment the spotlight turns off and the audience, them, is left in the dark. You walk off stage. You no longer sell yourself for scraps. They spiral, not because you hurt them, but because you stop performing for them. When you realize their crumbs of affection aren't sustenance, but starvation disguised as love, you wake up. And that clarity, that sacred self-recognition, it scorches the illusion they tried so hard to sell you. A narcissist fears truth more than anything, because your truth reveals that you are always the prize, and they were just the parasite clinging to your light. Number 7. Be the woman who finally lets the fantasy die. Hope can be holy, but in the hands of a narcissist, it becomes a weapon of mass confusion. They know exactly what they are doing when they sprinkle moments of kindness, when they act almost loving, almost healing. That calculated almost keeps you hanging on. It creates just enough illusion to keep you believing the best is just around the corner. But you've walked too many corners now, and nothing changes. That's not love. That's manipulation dressed in hope's clothing. The moment you surrender the fantasy, the moment you stop waiting for the day they wake up and finally treat you right, you cut the invisible thread they've used to pull you back every time. And that, right there, is when they panic. Because your hope was never just emotion, it was access. It was the open door they always assumed would remain unlocked. So when you lock it, from the inside, they feel it. The finality, the absence, the authority. They'll give you silence, thinking it'll break you. But you don't shatter. You don't chase. You close. You give yourself the closure they were never capable of giving. And to a narcissist, that is devastation in its purest form. Why? Because they've lost the power to write your ending. And when you become the one who shuts the door and never looks back, you leave them stuck in a loop they can't escape, wondering how the person they tried so hard to break ended up becoming the one thing they never imagined: free. Number 8. Become the woman who no longer wastes her breath explaining the abuse she endured. There comes a point in your healing when you no longer feel the urge to narrate your pain for the sake of validation. You don't need your friends to understand every detail, nor do you need your family's agreement or his family's sympathy. And most importantly, you owe him no explanation whatsoever. That need to be believed, to be understood, to be vindicated, it begins to melt away the moment you start living your truth instead of performing it. When you stop telling the story and begin embodying the lesson, everything shifts. You move differently. You reclaim your time, your space, your soul. And you do it without noise, without justification. And suddenly, the narcissist no longer has access to your energy or the narrative that once kept him feeling in control. They crave conflict like oxygen. They long for that endless loop of argument and confusion because, to them, chaos is a form of intimacy. But when you exit the arena without slamming the door, when you deny them the trial, the jury, and the performance, they are left standing in the echo chamber of their own delusions, with no one left to blame but themselves. And in that silence, your absence becomes louder and more devastating than any scream could ever be. It is not the rage that dismantles a narcissist. It is the soundless void you leave behind when you stop responding. Number 9. Be the woman who chooses not to hate. This might be the most misunderstood form of freedom. See, hate is still a tether. It's still a form of connection, a thread that binds you emotionally to the very person who tried to unravel you. And as long as you're fueled by hatred, you're still handing over pieces of your power. It might feel like strength on the surface, but underneath, it's still bondage. The moment you decide to detach, not with venom, not with fire, but with neutrality, you begin to shift the dynamic entirely. When you no longer carry the need to punish them, to expose them, to make them finally see what they've done, you begin to float above it all. That kind of emotional detachment, the kind that comes from deep, inner alignment and self-trust, is what narcissists find impossible to swallow. Because now, your forgiveness can't be weaponized, and your bitterness can't be manipulated. You become untouchable not through anger, but through peace. And that, above all, is what they fear most. Your capacity to carry on as if they never mattered at all. Number 10. Be the woman who rewrites her story with no role for him to play. If there's one thing a narcissist counts on, it's this: the belief that they'll always remain central in your mind, even long after they're gone. They don't just want to hurt you in the moment. They want to live rent-free in your memories, your heartbreak, and even your healing. They want to be the reason behind your hesitation to love again, your late-night tears, the way you second-guess your worth. In their eyes, they are the main character, even in a life they no longer belong to. But when you take the pen back into your hands and begin to craft a narrative that doesn't revolve around them, when they stop being the antagonist, the tragic loss, or even the lesson, you start to unwrite their power. They become a passing sentence, not a chapter, a background noise, not a turning point. And what devastates them more than anything is not that you've moved on, it's that you've outgrown the part of yourself that ever needed them in the first place. They don't mourn the loss of your beauty, your body, or even your attention. What truly haunts them is the realization that in the vast and luminous story of your becoming, they were merely a pause, not the plot. And that, my dear survivor, is where your freedom begins. If you're ready to keep writing that story, to evolve into the version of you they never imagined you'd become, then the upcoming workshop was designed with your name written all over it. Make sure you're registered before the booking closes, because this is where the real transformation begins. Thank you for holding space with me today. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, walk in your truth. They were never the author, you are.